So we've got a new module, Unit 4, Transport and Energy. We'll be working in this unit until next Friday, so it's just a week long. And so you've got a new warm-up, Unit 4, Day 1. Go ahead and get started, 6 minutes per usual. Thank you for that question, Melissa. I will talk more about that later on. So today is the first day of our fourth unit, which will be about transport and energy. So we're thinking about how cells maintain energy, how they create energy, as well as how they transport it between one another. This first lesson will focus on probably the two most foundational concepts of this unit, photosynthesis and respiration. Today is February 12th, 2021. We've got 3 standards to cover in this unit, so we're kind of chugging right along. Once we're done with these 3 standards, we will have covered 11 of the 30 in biology. The first standard we're going to cover is today's objective. Biologists will be able to analyze photosynthesis and cellular respiration in terms of how energy is stored, released, and transferred within and between these systems. Today's essential questions: what are the reactants and products of photosynthesis, and where does photosynthesis take place? We will, of course, talk about respiration. That's why we've included it in today's lesson title, but we're going to go into greater detail about respiration on Monday. So we'll focus a little bit more on photosynthesis today. So in order for you to start taking strong notes, as I know many of you have been, please make sure you've got a notebook out. Please make sure that you are writing down the lesson title and the date as well, and potentially even the objectives. So I'll leave this up for about 30 seconds. All right. So let's do a quick flashback to Unit 2. What type of cell is this that we're looking at here? Should be pretty easy for you guys.
Plant cell.
Yes, thank you, JT, and thank you, Dejan. Ooh, Dejan threw in another word too. Dejan, can you explain how you knew to throw in that eukaryotic word?
It had a nucleus, so it couldn't have been prokaryotic.
Yeah, excellent. So not only is this a plant cell, but as all plant cells are, this is a eukaryotic plant cell because Dejan has correctly identified this big nucleus right here. So I was going to ask a follow-up question, but he beat me to it. So yeah, we need to pay attention to several structures in this cell. One of them, probably the most important, is the nucleus. What else tells you that this is a plant cell? Because I see Sally and Abigail and Melissa and JT all jumped in.
The cell wall.
Okay, we can see a cell wall. Thank you. I think I heard at least one person, Sally, say that, and Janelle said it in the chat. What else tells us that this is a plant cell? Wonderful, JT. It's got a gigantic vacuole here, this big blue vacuole, which is storing a lot of water for the plant cell. And then Janelle tells us chloroplast, number 10, as well. So we've identified 4 structures that help us to identify this cell. Number 1, the nucleus. Number 2, the cell wall. Number 3, the large vacuole. And number 4, the chloroplast. Excellent job. Okay, so we're looking at these organelles here. Which process is occurring in these organelles? What is their job? Wonderful, Janelle. Yeah, the process that we're talking about is photosynthesis. Does anybody know anything about photosynthesis already? Yeah, photosynthesis is needed to make glucose. What about the types of organisms that do photosynthesis? Do we know anything about that? which organelles are actually going to do photosynthesis? Plants. Plants are one type of organelle. Thank you, Abigail. Are we aware of any others or just a more general class of organisms? Okay. So that more general class that I'm referring to is called autotrophs. Autotrophs are organisms that make their own food. So all autotrophic organisms are also photosynthetic. They use photosynthesis as the process to make their own food. Photosynthesis is the process in which autotrophs use carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight to create glucose and oxygen. So here we're starting to get a little bit into some chemistry because we're including molecular formulas here. CO2, H2O, C6H12O6, O2. These are all molecular formulas. So please do write them down, but also write down what they mean. CO2 is carbon dioxide, water is H2O. So yeah, heterotrophs describe most animals. There are some special cases. Algae are autotrophic organisms, so they make their own food. They do photosynthesis. Most animals are heterotrophic, which means that they obtain their nutrients from different sources. We've got that word, that root word hetero there. Good job. So we're going to see a chemical equation in a few slides, but it is important to note that CO2, H2O, and sunlight are reactants. So they are the substances that are needed to start the reaction. On the other hand, C6H12O6 and O2 are products. So they are what is actually being produced throughout this reaction. This animation captures that well. Carbon dioxide and water and sunlight are needed. The plant, or it could also be algae, it could also be some specific types of bacteria, go through this process of photosynthesis to create carbohydrates like glucose and oxygen. Okay. So let's watch this cool video from Crash Course. It's going to move pretty quickly, as all Crash Course videos do, but it's going to give us a pretty in-depth look into photosynthesis.
Photosynthesis it is not some kind of abstract scientific thing. Photosynthesis, some kind of abstract scientific thing. You would be dead without plants and their magical, nay, scientific ability to convert sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water into glucose and pure, delicious oxygen. This happens exclusively through photosynthesis, a process that was developed 450 million years ago and actually rather sucks. It's complicated, inefficient, and confusing, but you are committed to having a better, deeper understanding of our world, or more probably, you'd like to do well on your test. So let's delve. There are two sorts of reactions in photosynthesis, the light-dependent reactions and the light-independent reactions, and you've probably already figured out the difference between those two, so that's nice. The light-independent reactions are called the Calvin cycle. Yes, that Calvin cycle. Photosynthesis is basically respiration in reverse, and we've already covered respiration, so maybe you should just go watch that video backwards. Or you could keep watching this one. Either way, we've already talked about what photosynthesis needs in order to work: water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight. So how do they get those things? First, water. Let's assume that we're talking about a vascular plant here. That's the kind of plant that has pipe-like tissues that conduct water, minerals, and other materials to different parts of the plant. These are like trees and grasses and flowering plants. In this case, the roots of the plants absorb the water and bring it to the leaves through tissues called xylem. Carbon dioxide gets in and oxygen gets out through tiny pores in the leaves called stomata. It's actually surprisingly important that plants keep oxygen levels low inside of their leaves for reasons that we will get into later. And finally, individual photons from the sun are absorbed in the plant by a pigment called chlorophyll. All right, you remember plant cells? If not, you could go watch the video where we spend the whole time talking about plant cells. One thing that plant cells have that animal cells don't: plastids. And what is the most important plastid? The chloroplast, which is not, as it is sometimes portrayed, just a big fat sack of chlorophyll. It's got complicated internal structure. Now, the chlorophyll is stashed in membranous sacs called thylakoids, and the thylakoids are stacked into grana. Inside the thylakoid is the lumen, and outside of the thylakoid, but still inside of the chloroplast, is the stroma. The thylakoid membranes are phospholipid bilayers, which, if you remember, means that they are really good at maintaining concentration gradients of ions and proteins and other things. This means keeping a concentration higher on one side than the other of the membrane. You're going to need to know all of these things. I'm sorry. Now that we've taken our little tour of the chloroplast, it's time to get down to the actual chemistry. First thing that happens, a photon created by the fusion reactions of our sun is about to end its 93 million mile journey by slapping into a molecule of chlorophyll. This kicks off stage one, the light-dependent reactions, proving that yes, nearly all life on our planet is fusion powered. When chlorophyll gets hit by that photon, an electron absorbs that energy and gets excited. This is the technical term for electrons gaining energy and not having anywhere to put it, and when it's done by a photon, it's called photoexcitation. But let's just imagine, for the moment anyway, that every photon is whatever dreamy young man 12-year-old girls are currently obsessed with, and electrons are 12-year-old girls. The trick now, and the entire trick of photosynthesis, is to convert the energy of those electrons into something that the plant can use. We are literally going to be spending the entire rest of the video talking about that. I hope that that's okay with you. That first chlorophyll is not on its own here. It's part of an insanely complicated complex of proteins and lipids and other molecules called photosystem 2 that contains at least 99 different chemicals, including over 30 individual chlorophyll molecules. This is the first of 4 protein complexes that plants need for the light-dependent reactions. And if you think it's complicated that we call the first complex photosystem 2 instead of photosystem 1, then you're welcome to call it by its full name, which is plastoquinone oxoreductase. Oh, no, you don't want to call it that? Right then, photosystem 2. Or, if you want to be brief, PS2. PS2 and indeed all of the protein complexes in the light-dependent reactions straddle the membrane of the thylakoids in the chloroplasts. Now that excited electron is going to go on a journey designed to extract all of its new energy and convert that energy into useful stuff. This is called the electron transport chain, in which energized electrons lose their energy in the series of reactions that capture the energy necessary to keep life living. So PS2's chlorophyll now has this electron that is so excited that when a special protein designed specifically for stealing electrons shows up, the electron actually leaps off of the chlorophyll molecule onto the protein, which we call a mobile electron carrier because it's a mobile electron carrier. The chlorophyll then freaks out like a mother who has just had her 12-year-old daughter abducted by a teen idol and is like, what do I do to fix this problem? And then it, in cooperation with the rest of Photosystem 2, does something so amazing and important that I can barely believe that it keeps happening every day. It splits that ultra-stable molecule, H2O, stealing one of its electrons to replenish the one it lost. The byproducts of this water splitting, hydrogen ions, which are just single protons, and oxygen. Sweet, sweet oxygen. This reaction, my friends, is the reason that we can breathe. Brief interjection. Next time someone says that they don't like it when there are chemicals in their food, please remind them that all life is made of chemicals, and would they please stop pretending that the word chemical is somehow a synonym for carcinogen? Because, I mean, think about how chlorophyll feels when you say that. It spends all of its time and energy creating the air we breathe, and we're like, ew, chemicals are so gross. Now remember, all energized electrons from PS2 have been picked up by electron carriers and now are being transported to the second protein complex, the Cytochrome Complex. This little guy does two things. One, it serves as an intermediary between PS2 and PS1, and two, it uses a little bit of that energy from the electron to pump another proton into the thylakoid. So the thylakoid's starting to fill up with protons. We've created some by splitting water, and we moved one in using the cytochrome complex, but why are we doing this? Well, basically what we're doing is charging the thylakoid like a battery. By pumping the thylakoid full of protons, we're creating a concentration gradient. The protons then naturally want to get the heck away from each other, and so they push their way through an enzyme straddling the thylakoid membrane called ATP synthase. And that enzyme uses that energy to pack an inorganic phosphate onto ADP, making ATP the big daddy of cellular energy. All of this moving along the electron transport chain requires energy, and as you might expect, electrons are entering lower and lower energy states as we move along. This makes sense when you think about it. It's been a long while since those photons zapped us. We've been pumping hydrogen ions to create ATP. It's putting water and jumping onto different molecules. I'm tired just talking about it. Luckily, as 450 million years of evolution would have it, our electron is now about to get re-energized upon delivery to photosystem 1. So PS1 is a similar mix of proteins and chlorophyll molecules that we saw in PS2, but with some different products. After a couple of photons re-excite a couple of electrons, the electrons pop off and hitch a ride onto another electron carrier. This time, all of that energy will be used to help make NADPH, which, like ATP, exists solely to carry energy around. Here, yet another enzyme helps combine 2 electrons and 1 hydrogen ion with a little something called NADP+. As you may recall from our recent talk about respiration, there are these sort of distant cousins of B vitamins that are crucial to energy conversion. In photosynthesis, it's NADP+, and when it takes on those 2 electrons and 1 hydrogen ion, it becomes NADPH. So what we're left with now, after the light-dependent reactions, is chemical energy in the form of ATPs and NADPHs. And also, of course, we should not forget the most useful, useless byproduct in the history of useless byproducts, oxygen. If anybody needs a potty break, now would be a good time, or if you want to go rewatch that rather long and complicated bit about light-dependent reactions, go ahead and do that. It's not simple, and it's not going to get any simpler from here. Because now we are moving along to the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle is sometimes called the dark reactions, which is kind of a misnomer because they generally don't occur in the dark. They occur in the day along with the rest of the reactions. But they don't require energy from photons, so it's more proper to say light-independent reactions. Or if you're feeling non-descriptive, just say stage 2. Stage 2 is all about using the energy from those ATPs and NADPHs that we created in stage 1 to produce something that's actually useful for the plant. The Calvin cycle begins in the stroma, or the empty space inside of the chloroplast, if you remember correctly, and this phase is called carbon fixation because, yeah, we're about to fix a CO2 molecule onto our starting point, ribulose bisphosphate, or RUBP, which is always around in the chloroplast because not only is it the starting point of the Calvin cycle, it's also the end point, which is why it's a cycle. CO2 is fixed to RUBP with the help of an enzyme called ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate carboxylase oxidase, which we generally shorten to Rubisco. I'm in the chair again. Excellent. This time for a biography of Rubisco. Once upon a time, a one-celled organism was like, man, I need more carbon so I can make more little me's so I can take over the whole world. Luckily for that little organism, there was a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere, and so it evolved an enzyme that could suck up that CO2 and convert inorganic carbon into organic carbon. This enzyme was called Rubisco, and it wasn't particularly good at its job, but it was a heck of a lot better than just hoping to run into some chemically formed organic carbon. So the organism just made a ton of it to make up for how bad it was. Not only did the little plant stick with it, it took over the entire planet, rapidly becoming the dominant form of life. Slowly, through other reactions known as the light-dependent reactions, plants increased the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. Rubisco, having been designed in a world with tiny amounts of oxygen in the atmosphere, started getting confused. As often as half of the time, Rubisco started slicing ribulose bisphosphate with oxygen instead of CO2, creating a toxic byproduct that plants had to deal with in creative and specialized ways. This byproduct, called phosphoglycolate, is believed to tinker with some enzyme functions, including some involved in the Calvin cycle. So plants have to make other enzymes that break it down into an amino acid, glycine, and some compounds that are actually useful to the Calvin cycle. But plants had already sort of gone all in on the Rubisco strategy, and to this day, they have to produce huge amounts of it. Scientists estimate that at any given time there are about 40 billion tons of Rubisco on the planet. And plants just deal with that toxic byproduct. Another example, my friends, of unintelligent design. Back to the cycle. So ribulose bisphosphate gets a CO2 slammed onto it, and then immediately the whole thing gets crazy unstable. The only way to regain stability is for this new 6-carbon chain to break apart, creating 2 molecules of 3-phosphoglycerate. And these are the first stable products of the Calvin cycle. For reasons that will become clear in a moment, we're actually going to do this to 3 molecules of RUBP. Now we enter the second phase, reduction. Here, we need some energy, so some ATP slams a phosphate group onto the 3-phosphoglycerate, and then NADPH pops some electrons on, and voila! We have 2 molecules of glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, or G3P. This is a high-energy, 3-carbon compound that plants can convert into pretty much any carbohydrate, like glucose for short-term energy storage, cellulose for structure, starch for long-term storage. And because of this, G3P is considered the ultimate product of photosynthesis. However, unfortunately, this is not the end. We need 5 G3Ps to regenerate the 3 RUBPs that we started with. We also need 9 molecules of ATP and 6 molecules of NADPH. So with all these chemical reactions, all of this chemical energy, we can convert 3 RUBPs into 6 G3Ps, but only one of those G3Ps gets to leave the cycle. The other G3Ps, of course, being...
Okay, well, that's a lot. If you are actually interested in learning about that process from beginning to end, and how complicated it is, take AP biology. We do talk about the specifics of that really complicated chemical reaction. But in order to do that, in order to take AP biology, you first need to pass biology, and you then need to be at least enrolled in chemistry. You don't necessarily need to have already taken it, but you need to at least be enrolled to take it concurrently. So it's an interesting process, but it's a lot. We do not go into such depth or detail as it relates to this class, but we will. I just wanted to give you guys an idea of how complicated photosynthesis is. We basically just need to know the reactants and the products and where this is all taking place. So as he mentioned in the video, photosynthesis takes place specifically in the chloroplast of a plant cell. Most plant cells have many different chloroplasts. And even within these chloroplasts, there are other smaller structures that are actually doing the photosynthesis. These structures are called thylakoids, and these thylakoids are stacked up in what are called stroma. Don't need to know all that. What I do ask that you all write down on this slide is chlorophyll. when you look around you and you see all these different colors, assuming that you don't have any colorblind students in this class right now, so you're looking around and you can see these different colors. The colors that you're seeing are actually the colors that are being reflected off of the surface. So different chemicals absorb different wavelengths of light. The wavelengths that are not absorbed, meaning the wavelengths that are reflected, are actually the colors that you see. So, different chemicals and substances will reflect different wavelengths of light, and those are the colors that they actually appear to be. In the case of plants, plants absorb blue light and they absorb red light, and so the light that gets reflected is green, and this is why most plants appear to be green. The reason for this is a little more complicated, but it has to do with energy. Red and blue light are energy efficient for the plant. They give the plant the best opportunity to do photosynthesis. So again, the reactants of photosynthesis are here. We've got 6 carbon dioxide molecules, plus 6 water molecules, plus sunlight. We use enzymes to catalyze this reaction, to speed it up. And what is produced is 1 molecule of glucose and 6 molecules of oxygen gas, essentially. So you guys are my honors class. Let's see if we can break this equation down a little bit. Actually, I'll pause. I want you to write down the equation. Please do make sure that if you won't be able to remember what CO2 is, you write down carbon dioxide. If you won't remember that H2O is water, then you write down water. So I'll give about 15 seconds for you all to write down this equation. Okay. So we've got these numbers in front of the molecular formulas here. There's a 6 in front of CO2, a 6 in front of H2O, and a 6 in front of O2. Why do you all think those numbers are there? Does anybody have any thoughts about that? These numbers. Why are those numbers there? Okay, yeah, thank you, Abigail. It's telling us that there are 6 of them, so 6 carbon dioxide molecules, 6 molecules of water. What I also want you to notice is that with each individual atom or with each individual element, we should be able to have the same amount in the beginning as we do at the end. What I mean by this, there's this law of conservation of mass, or conservation of matter, rather, which states that matter can be neither created nor destroyed. So whatever I start off with, I have to end up with that same amount. It doesn't just disappear into thin air. It has to be accounted for somewhere in the chemical reaction. So for example, how many carbon atoms do I have in my reactants? How many C's? How many carbon atoms? Thank you, Abigail. Yeah, we've got, and Melissa. There are 6 of them. How many carbon atoms do I have in my products? There are also 6. Yeah. So this subscript here is telling you that there are 6 carbon atoms. This subscript applies to the atom that comes immediately before it. What about how many hydrogen atoms do I have in my reactants? How many H's? Okay, now I got you guys here. Abigail picked up on it. But in reality, there are 12. What we've got here is a subscript. This subscript is telling you that in one water molecule, there are 2 atoms of hydrogen. So in one H2O, there are 2 hydrogens. But in this case, I've got 6 molecules of water. So what I've got to do is multiply 6 times 2. So 6 times 2 tells me that there are 12 hydrogen atoms here. That might be confusing. We're really getting into chemistry here, and you guys will end up taking chemistry next year, hopefully. But this is a foundational concept in chemistry, how we write down molecules and molecular formulas. So again, one singular molecule of water has 2 hydrogen atoms in it. That's why we say H2O. But in this case, we've got a 6 in front of H2O. So this is telling us that there are 6 molecules of water. So 6 times 2 means that there are 12 hydrogen atoms. If we look in the products, we can also see that relatively easily. We've got 12 hydrogen atoms in one molecule of glucose. So 12 and 12, they're equal. Now oxygen might be a little more complicated for you all to see. Does anybody think they know how many oxygen atoms there are in all of the reactants? What's the total number of oxygen atoms? Excellent, Abigail, yeah. Can you explain? Do you mind explaining how you figured that out?
There's 12 in the carbon dioxide and there's 6 in water.
And how did you know that there were 12 in carbon dioxide?
Because the O has a 2 at the bottom and it has a 6 before the 2 letters.
And so you did what to the 6 and the 2?
Multiply them?
Multiplied them, good. Yeah, so carbon dioxide is CO2. So what that means is that in one molecule of carbon dioxide, there are 2 oxygen atoms. But in this case, we don't have one molecule. We've got 6. So 6 times 2 tells me that there are 12 oxygen atoms here. And then there's another source of oxygen in my reactants. I'm also getting oxygen from water. I'm getting 6 of them. So 6 over here, 12 over here, 6 over here, that adds up to 18. And we can figure it out that we've also got 18 in my products. So again, whatever I start off with, because of this law of conservation of matter, I also have to end up with it. I've got to account for each number of atoms on both sides of the equation. That's just a brief preview of chemistry. Something that I think some of you will enjoy. It has a little bit more math, a lot more math actually. All right, but also it's important to note that we do have enzymes here to speed up the reaction. So that being said, let's do a quick review of enzymes. This is a simple and common enzyme graph or enzyme diagram. What should be under this box? What is A identifying?
Products, I think what it means.
Not A. Go ahead, Lisa.
Wait, you said what?
This one right here. What is this thing? It's what we start off with.
It starts with like something like sub.
Good, good. Yeah, and JT put it into the chat too. This is a substrate, also known as a reactant. So your substrate or your reactant is what you start off with. What about under this box here? Wonderful. Thank you, JT. So this is the active site. The active site is the location within the enzyme where the action actually takes place, where the reaction is going to happen. That's why we call it the active site. What about behind this box? The enzyme. Wonderful, Janelle. Good. And I think, who was that? Melissa getting ready to say something? And then D. What about behind this box? Those are the products, right? So enzymes were something else that we were introduced to in Unit 1, but of course, cumulative class, we've got to continue to touch on it. Good job. All right, so now we're going to talk about cellular respiration. I'm going to move through this quickly so that you guys get some time to do the exit ticket and the asynchronous assignment. Cellular respiration takes place in a specific organelle. Which organelle is referred to as the powerhouse of the cell? Good. Yeah, these are mitochondria. And what do the mitochondria do for the cell? Yes, good. They create energy. So let's think about these questions. What happens to your heart rate when you're working out, when you're engaged in some movement? What's going to happen to your heart rate?
Goes up.
It goes up. Wonderful. What about your breathing rate, your respiration rate?
Goes up.
It also goes up. It increases. And so what do you think is happening inside of your cells when you're exercising? What are they doing?
I guess they working more than usual.
They're kind of kicking things into overdrive. And as Janelle says it, they are creating, they're also using more energy, but that requires that they create it. So I like that you've identified both sides of that coin, Janelle. That's excellent. They're both creating more energy and they're using more energy, which will allow your muscles to contract so that you can move more. Now, the thing about it is that in order for them to create energy, the cells need oxygen. Oxygen is like the fuel that our cells need to create energy. So that's why your heart rate goes up, and that's why your breathing rate goes up. You're breathing more to take in more oxygen. This is why, for those of you, if you've ever played a sport and you're working out and your coach tells you stand up, put your hands on your head, don't hunch over, because you need to take in more oxygen. That gives you more energy. And then your heart rate increases because your heart is pumping faster to get that oxygen delivered to the cells throughout your body. Okay, remember, the blood is in charge of transport. Take it back to Sternger. The blood is going to carry oxygen from your lungs to other parts of your body. So these things all work in concert. JT threw in adrenaline. Adrenaline is a hormone that's produced by the kidneys that does help your heart. It does increase your heart rate. So good. Thank you for throwing that in there. It's the fight or flight hormone. So really, your heart rate is an indirect measurement of how much cellular respiration is occurring. Skipping that though. We're not going to watch this video for now because it's too long. But cellular respiration is the process in which a cell turns glucose into ATP. ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. And I'm sending that to the chat. Not adenosine, I misspelled it. Adenosine. Sorry, not adenoside, adenosine. So yes, this process is taking place inside of a cell's mitochondria. And all living organisms need to be able to do cellular respiration because all living organisms need energy. There are different types of cellular respiration. We're only going to talk about one of those types today. We'll introduce a couple more on Monday. So different organisms do different types, and even within the same organism, it just kind of depends on, the availability of oxygen ultimately. But all living organisms need to be able to do some form of respiration to create energy. And what they're doing is they're going to turn those carbohydrates, that glucose, into energy. So it's really well, I'll let you guys figure it out. Aerobic cellular respiration is the type of respiration that includes or involves oxygen. It uses oxygen as one of the reactants. So this word aerobic means involving oxygen. This process is relatively efficient. It's not perfect, but it's relatively efficient as it's able to create 36 ATP molecules. Keep that number in mind because when we talk about the other forms of respiration on Monday, we're going to compare how much energy they're able to create. So aerobic, which means it uses oxygen, is able to create 36 ATP molecules. And as byproducts, it also creates water and carbon dioxide. In eukaryotic organisms, this process takes place inside of the mitochondria. But of course, prokaryotic organisms do not have mitochondria. They don't have any membrane-bound organelles. So this process can only take place in their cytoplasm. Okay. Now here's the chemical reaction or the chemical equation for cellular respiration. I do want you all to write this down, and as you write it, I want you to think about if you notice anything similar. Hopefully, if you wrote down the equation for photosynthesis, you are able to draw some conclusions about the two. So write this one down and then think about any similarities you see. Okay, so what do you notice? Oops. Anybody pick up on it yet? Yeah, thank you, Melissa. Yes. So the products of photosynthesis are the reactants of cellular respiration. And then Janelle is also telling us the products of respiration are the reactants of photosynthesis, minus sunlight. So what this means is that these two can exist in a cycle, essentially. All you need to do is throw in some sunlight. This is why if you literally, and this has been done before, you can put a plant with some soil and a little bit of water into a jar and seal it off and expose it to sunlight, and that plant will be able to grow and exist by itself without any additional input forever, essentially. As the leaves, some leaves will certainly die, but they then become nutrients for the plant to use. The water is recycled because water is used for photosynthesis, but then it gets created after respiration. That glucose is used for respiration, and then more glucose is created during the process of photosynthesis. So you can literally put a plant in a jar, seal it off, and it will continue to grow and live healthily forever. So these two reactions are essentially the reverse of one another. They're just opposites. This is what allows them to exist in a cycle. The reactants of one are the products of the other. And the products of one are the reactants of the other. Good to know. All right, so we've got 17 minutes left in class. There is an exit ticket with questions about photosynthesis and respiration. There's also an asynchronous assignment called U4D1, Photosynthesis and Respiration Practice. And then I just wanted to provide you reminders of the other two assignments from Unit 3. The Unit 2 exam, most missed questions, will be due tonight at 11:59. Actually, you know what? I will extend the deadline for that until Sunday. I'll extend the deadline until Sunday. And then also the science of race will be due Sunday as well. So I'll give you guys the weekend to work on both of these. Keep in mind that the Unit 2 exam, most missed questions, is a formal assignment. So it is worth more points. Even though it looks like it's only worth 20, it's weighted more heavily. So please make sure that you give that one the attention it deserves. It's 10 multiple choice questions followed by short free response questions afterwards. I know some of you have already completed it, so that's great. I will be grading those. Okay, so go ahead and Go ahead and get to work. We've got 16 minutes left. Be productive with your time. Okay, folks, so it's now 1:20, so you all can go ahead and get ready for fourth block. I appreciate you working hard today. Please do be productive this weekend, but also take some time to relax and enjoy yourselves. I'll talk to you on Monday.
All right, Mr. Rudd.
See you.
Yeah, we good.
Thank you.
About that like extra credit assignment that you send in our emails, where do we submit it?
Tayshawn, I'm not sure what extra credit assignment you're talking about. Are you talking about the email from Dr. Potts?
Yes.
Okay, you can email it to me. Do you know my email?